Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. This week we turn our attention to Sweden. In some ways, the country is a microcosm of the challenges as well as the opportunities of the path to decarbonisation. Many wind parks in the north of Sweden have faced a very tough financial environment amid low wholesale prices and oversupply. However, the country is taking major steps to clean up the production of steel, and the rest of Europe is watching closely. My name is Richard Sverrisson, and joining me today are Mia Bodin of Bodecker Partners. A warm welcome to you, Mia.
Thank you very much. Very nice to be here.
Welcome back to the pod. And Arne Österlind of H2 Green Steel. A warm welcome to you, Arne.
Thank you very much.
I think I'll start with you, Mia, to give us a bit of the context and the background. What's happening in Sweden? What's the current state of renewables expansion in the country?
We have had a very healthy investment environment in Sweden for quite a long time now, I would say, for renewables. So if we start with the onshore wind development, it's been healthy. I think we have currently around 35 terawatt hours of renewable production or of wind energy production. And the next 3 years, we have another 20 terawatt hours around coming. Only based on turbine, what's actually been ordered, turbines been ordered, and an investment decision. So it's looking quite good the next 3 years. Solar definitely coming rapidly as well. Offshore, nothing so far, as we know. We have some old ones, but no new ones so far. But definitely starting to see at least an interest in investing in those as well, and lots of projects out there. So. But of course, after these next 3 years, regarding onshore wind power, there are challenges, and we have seen permission times, lead times being longer and longer. And I think we're among the worst in Europe now when it comes to how long it takes to get your permission for a wind farm. We have the municipal veto that has, of course, created quite a lot of problems for many wind farms.
Tell me a bit about that. What if our listeners aren't aware of that? What does that mean in effect?
Well, in effect, it means that the municipalities have a final right to reduce or to reject a wind farm, and that's of course good. They should have that. But the problem is that they have had the right to change their minds throughout the whole process. So the wind farm can have invested a lot of money. They can even have had an acceptance from the municipality and the permission, of course, the environmental permissions and all that, and started even to come close to construction. Maybe even have ordered the wind turbines, and then there's a new municipality or the new steer of the municipality, and they get a no.
And they pull the rug from under
them. And they just pull the rug completely. So that, of course, has caused a lot of hesitance among the investors, because you don't want to invest in something that where you know that the rug can be pulled anytime. So that is a big problem, and still is going forward.
Sorry to interrupt them here, but it's for we've often talked on the podcast about these red tape, bureaucracy issues, permitting, and it's become very much in southern Europe. But for some listeners, it would be quite interesting to hear that there's also an issue in the Nordics, and particularly in Sweden.
Yeah, absolutely. That has been an issue for the last years, and an increasing issue. But it's not only the permitting. Then, of course, it's also lack of grid capacity. It's harder and harder to receive enough grid capacity to build out. So I would say it's the investment interest is definitely there. There's lots of potential. There are projects out there ready to be built and constructed, but it takes time, and we need to have more clearance, so to say, both on the political side and the grid capacity side for it to happen. That's for onshore, and I think solar is about the same as well. So that's kind of the setting.
Would it be fair to say that it's kind of an oversupply situation at the moment? I mean, prices have been very, very low, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, both low and high, I would say. But the high prices we've had is probably not because of the renewables. That was other causes for that. But yes, we have had an oversupply, or we do have a net oversupply in Sweden. So that's for sure. But prices that we've seen have been stable enough for wind power producers. So I think the problems that we have seen in the newspapers and so on, it's not a sign of the business being in trouble. There's still healthy economics in building wind power today, especially for the ones that have already been built that had lower costs when building it. Now costs have gone up a bit for newer wind farms to be built, but so it's the financials are healthy. That's not the main problem here. Then of course we've come into that later. We've had some problems with.
We'll touch upon those later because there's been some instances that have created some media coverage or some ripples out there. But we're also here to talk to you, Arne, about this very exciting project in the north of Sweden. I mean, H2 Green Steel. It sort of says itself what it is. I mean, it's self-explanatory in a way. But could you explain what the project is and why in Sweden?
Right now we are about halfway through our greenfield project in Bodin. It will be the first big steel plant built in the last 50 years in Europe, actually. Our mission within H2 Green Steel is to decarbonize the hard-to-abate industry. And we used to say that we start with steel, and the Bodin steel plant is our first physical asset aiming to produce about 5 million tons steel per year once we are up in full production. So right now we have about 2 years left in the building process. So we will ramp up during mid-2026. And we will have around 1 year ramp up, and we will reach 2.5 million ton production in 2027. But that is our first project. We are in parallel looking at other sites globally. So we're already looking in Portugal, in Canada, in Brazil, for example.
This is a project that's here for the long term. I mean, so you're looking at, long-term deals to secure that green energy, whether it be hydro, solar, or wind.
We need to reduce the risk in the project to balance the downside risk for electricity price. Meaning that, like we saw in 2022, when we have electricity prices above 100 euro in the Nordics, that will be a very hard situation to face if it comes to reality, if you're not having hedging done in the portfolio. So that's why we are working with a 10-year hedging portfolio to even out the price and to be able to achieve low electricity prices ongoing.
Because for the financing to get the banks on board to such a project, you have to prove you have hedged out some of the production, but also have secured long-term deals for electricity.
Yeah, it is different phases actually. We have one phase, it's until 2032 or something. It's the first phase for the H2 Green Steel when we are dependent on the financing from the banks, and we need to fulfill their demands regarding the securing of the downside risk in the product. And electricity, for example, is about 1/3 of our cost for producing steel. So that is very important to hedge that in a proper way.
Can you tell us a little bit about the production process? Because the clue's in the name, H2 Green Steel. So hydrogen is obviously very important. You're having, is it, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of maybe the world's largest electrolyzer being constructed in Sweden.
Yeah.
So the green hydrogen in particular is a very important part of this industrial process, isn't it?
Green hydrogen is one of our key elements. We will use hydrogen to reduce the iron ore instead of using coal and coks. And by that we will save about 2 tons of carbon emission per ton steel produced. And in our case, we will produce about 5 million tons steel per year. So that will mean that we will save about 10 million tons of carbon emission.
And that's not insignificant in any way.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely. But Mia, I mean, this kind of project is obviously quite important for Sweden and the Nordics. We've seen, the paper and pulp industry has been struggling for years and years. Given everything, the move to digital, one of the main reasons. But what does this mean, a project like this, for Sweden and the Nordic region?
I think all these industry projects that we see are extremely important for the competitiveness of Sweden as a country. So, we have H2 Green Steel, of course, decarbonising steel sector, not just in Sweden, but in all of Europe. And if it's not going to be done here, it's going to be done somewhere else. And of course, we want it to be done in Sweden for obvious reasons. And we have LKAB, SSAB, we have all the heavy industry in Sweden that is now relying on fossil fuel that will need to transform into something else, they will be they are part of the EU ETS system. So, I mean, first of all, they won't be able to, it will be very expensive, first of all, to receive the allowances. And soon they won't even allow they won't even be allowed the allowances at all, so to say. So they have to do something. And that has to be done here, or they will be moved somewhere else. It's just something that we have to do. And we have extremely good conditions in the Nordics compared to many of the other countries. I mean, we have had for a long time low electricity prices, and definitely have the potential to have that in the future as well. We have, as we said, all these new projects ongoing that can provide this electricity. We have a big source of biogenic CO2 that is needed for several of these processes as well, when they're going to produce ammonia for fertilizers, or e-methanol for shipping fuel or aviation fuel. So we have lots of forest simply in Sweden and also in Finland, in the Nordics, and that's important. We have a long coastline with ports being able to ship the final products down to Europe. So we have the potential here to do something. So it would be a very big waste and frustrating if we are not going to cope with that here with these good conditions that we have, and we have lots of projects ongoing now. But it's important to remember that it's only a few of these that have actually started or that have taken their final investment decision. So it's enormous amount of projects out there with very good projects, but they are not decided yet. So we will make sure, they need to make sure that we have to make sure that they have the grid capacity, that we have the low enough electricity prices and access to renewable power. So in order for those to actually happen, it's just not going to happen by itself.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of these projects get announced with big fanfare, but when maybe before the final investment decision is reached, then they kind of get dropped. And that's
a risk, of course.
That's a risk, of course. But what is the outlook for demand or consumption of electricity in Sweden? Is that what are your sort of predictions going forward?
It's extremely hard to say as well. I'm not the one deciding on these projects. But I mean, the plan, of course, of what we read in all these scenarios is, of course, a doubling or even more of the electricity consumption. I am a bit skeptical that will happen, at least in that time period, simply because of what we've discussed. There are delays because of grid connection capacity. We are seeing a reduction in pace for new renewable production coming online, and fossil-free production. That will take longer. I think all agree on that. We're not going to see any new nuclear either before 2035, and probably later than that. So, and investment decisions need to be taken a lot sooner than that. So I'm a bit worried that we won't get that consumption increase, because consumption increase is good in this case, because it is the industry that we need to keep in Sweden. So, but it's hard to say whether it will be half of that or I don't know. Very hard to say. But
there's a lot of talk of data centers, isn't there, and AI and stuff as well, and in
that's
Sweden.
That's definitely something that could that could come and maybe compensate for even if all the power to X sector does not come as fast as we think. Then data centers and AI, I mean, that can come quicker. So that's lots of uncertainties.
Because I think with hydrogen as well, if I turn to you, Arne, it's I talk to people in the market a lot, and they, the concept of generating hydrogen, transporting it, then burning it for potentially in hydrogen-ready gas plants seems sort of very, say, wasteful, or not the best use of money in terms of.
I don't think anybody has that in mind, actually.
So that's with your project. You're producing the hydrogen on site, and there's none of it being transported.
No, we're using it ourselves in our process. Yeah.
So that's a different kind of use case, if you like, and I think that's a very positive case for hydrogen, or that's what that basically some of the experts will tell me. But for you, obviously, key is. Low prices and to maintain that.
Regarding the production of hydrogen, I would say that low electricity prices is key to be able to get the cost you need to have the case bankable.
But, as we said, securing, competitive electricity prices is important. How do you go about doing it? You don't need to go into any sort of details or give away any secrets here on it, but, is it spot day-ahead markets? Is it forward markets on the exchange? Is it PPAs, or power purchase deals, which are long-term, or a combination of all three?
It's a combination of everything.
Yeah.
So I will say that most part of it is long-term PPA contracts from existing power, especially for us in the north of Nordics. But if you look at the sites in like in the US, you'll be very much reliant on new-built wind power, solar power, and the challenge there is not to be too exposed to the grid power, because you get exposed to the grid mix with a lot of carbon emission footprints. So that's why what we are trying to avoid in our production as well.
Yeah, of course, that's important. Otherwise, it's not so green anymore, is it? So that's yeah, absolutely. So, Mia, and if I stick on the topic of PPAs and talk a little bit, there's been a lot in the news in Sweden how some companies or some wind parks came close to bankruptcy. Maybe we were even bankrupt. What was the reason for that?
Well, the reason for that was a hedging strategy that is based on a very high amount of baseload PPAs, meaning that the wind farms have promised to deliver a specific amount of electricity to an off-taker every hour. And of course, as we know, the wind power doesn't produce that evenly. So in some hours, it would produce less than promised, and then the wind park would have to purchase that from the market to be able to deliver it to the customer. And in other hours, it will produce more, and it can deliver what it produces and then sell the rest at market prices. And that's in itself has not really been a big problem before when the market prices were more stable, because the lack of electricity that it produced, you could purchase from the market at about the same price as you had agreed to sell to the customer, so not making a big loss there, and then you would get some of that back when you could sell the excess to the market. But with the volatile prices that we have seen, the difference between high prices and low prices have been a lot higher. And at the same time, we have had some years also where the wind production was lower than forecasted. So those two in combination has, of course, meant that there have been more hours where the wind farm would have to purchase something from the market at one price and then sell it back to the customer at another price. And another problem there is what we in the business call cannibalization, that in those hours where you produce too little is also the same hours where everyone else is producing too little. There's simply not enough wind in the system, which means that the power prices are generally a lot higher in those hours. So during the hours where you have to purchase from the market, you would have to purchase at very high prices and sell at your lower agreed PPA price. And in the hours where you could be happy and you produce a lot, the power price would be very low. So you would not gain that difference there. You would have to sell it back to the market at lower prices. So all those things in combination has created problems. And the reason why you entered into these baseload PPAs was really that a lot of the investors in these wind farms, in order to have their financing secured, to have debt financing, you would need to have secured your power prices. And many of the banks are also European banks. They are used to feed in tariffs. They wanted to see the price risk completely covered. And the price risk is covered in the baseload PPA. It's just that the profile risk and the volume risk was somehow kind of forgotten in the equation. And the
quite important elements there.
Exactly. And the share was too high. So baseload PPAs in itself is not a problem but it needs to be to a reasonable share where you can actually say, well, this, we know that we will always produce this at least. And then it's fine. It's just you can't overpromise in it.
Do you have a view here, Arne?
Yeah, I would say that until early 2022, the high volatility was not a problem, especially not for the wind power industry. You can live with selling baseload contracts from wind power farms. But as we see now, the partly cannibalization effect is really large, and also the high volatility in spot prices make it almost impossible to sell wind power PPAs as baseload. Then you're out of business sooner or later. Or you need to have a huge premium on top. And that's not affordable for the consumers.
Do you work with developers sometimes as well?
Yeah, we are working really close to developers, and we're trying to, like I say, become the perfect off-taker for wind power or solar power, for that matter. Meaning that we are able to take on as produced power because we have a huge portfolio, and it could cope with some variation in delivery from wind power.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, absolutely. And so, what's the answer here then? I mean, baseload, those baseload PPAs, do they not really fit for purpose anymore in the current shape of the market?
Well, not in that. In that amount that it has been before, definitely not for renewable power production. But I think, PPAs in itself is a very good thing. It's a power purchase agreement between an off-taker and a power producer. So that's really good. And the problem here is that the off-taker would want baseload and the producer wants pay as produced. And it's not impossible to close that gap, but it needs to be done. There needs to be some kind of risk sharing in it, and we are getting closer to that. As Arne said as well, they are trying to find solutions. We all want the same thing here. The wind industry and the solar industry, they want the steel industry and the cement industry to grow, and the cement industry, the steel industry, they need the renewable power industry to grow. So we all want the same thing here. So
there is a symbiosis there.
Absolutely, and there are ways in PPAs. You can structure a PPA the way you want it, and there are versions where you could share that risk in different type of contracts and combinations between pay as produced and a base load. And there are other revenue streams on ancillary services. If you can add some flexibility, some storage to that, and you can share the revenues on that side. So I'm sure we'll be able to find ways to mitigate that risk and to close that gap. But it's both a price gap and it's a gap of what kind of risks you want to take, and it's probably going to take a little while before we find the best solution on this.
The best balance, absolutely.
But we do have a very good system in Sweden for that, and we have a renewable grid. Also talks about an innovation, trying to place your industry closer to a wind farm to avoid maybe having to connect to the grid until the grid is there. So I think lots of different solutions that we will see. It's just maybe not tomorrow.
Of course, as well, the policy and the regulatory environment is very important. And if I maybe as a closing question, Arne, could I ask you about if you had one wish for policymakers, either Sweden or the European level, what would that be?
I would say make up your minds regarding this, because since the election we have turned from wind power into nuclear power. I don't think it's good for the future, actually, because we end up in a wait-and-see situation. So I think it's good if you can balance this discussion a bit and see what is best for the country in the long run, not only to the next election.
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it, when you have that sort of pendulum swings, pro-nuclear, pro-wind, pro-nuclear again. That's obviously for investors such as yourselves and others, it creates that level of uncertainty, which is not always very welcome, if I understand you correctly. Absolutely. So certainty, and stick to your guns in a way. That's maybe
I think that's very important, because it's a long-term decision that everybody has to make.
Exactly. And if you don't want to shy away or scare off the investors in this very important energy transition we have, what would your wish be, Mia?
I think it would be exactly the same.
Really? Okay,
we actually had an event last year with lots of investors and project developers of large-scale wind and solar farms, and I think we asked them what would potentially stop your willingness to invest, whether it be in power to X or whether it be in wind farms or solar or storage, and it all said political uncertainty. And grid.
Power to X, that's power to hydrogen.
Yes, exactly. Power to hydrogen, to ammonia or e-methanol. So I think political stability and knowing, and it's a bit sad that the whole both industry and the energy sector, wind and the renewable energy sector, are not trying to get rid of nuclear in any way. We are all for that's a good part of the mix. So why should the politicians be either or? We need it all to have a Swedish country that will be competitive.
Absolutely, it's need. It's not black and white. This in Sweden, certainly, at least, and that's important to bear in mind. But thank you both very much for being guests on the Montel Weekly podcast. We are at Montel Swedish Energy Day. There's been some hubbub in the corridors, so I hope that hasn't put you off, and I hope it doesn't put the listeners off. But thank you once again, Arne and Mia.
Thank you very much.